Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 76 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, and today's episode is on how to make anxiety your friend. And it is Saturday the 20th of February 2021 as I record this. So today's episode I really like because when I came across this article that inspired today's blog post, it reminds me about one of my favourite psychology facts, or one of the best psychology things that I've seen, and I talk more about this in the content part of today's episode, that stress is actually our friend, and it's also because we think stress is bad, then that's when, that's when we start to get the negative physical effects that stress brings on. So that's really, really interesting. And then today's episode actually builds upon that, and it actually puts it towards anxiety, that anxiety isn't bad for us, and anxiety is our body trying to help us. So there's more on that in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section. So we're looking at the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and there are actually some really good articles today. So saying that girls are just as good as boys at maths can inadvertently perpetuate gender stereotypes. Though girls and boys do equally well on maths tests, the stereotype that girls aren't as naturally able at maths or likely to be extremely smart is adopted early. Even 6-year-olds in the US endorse it. Of course, this stereotype harms women in an education setting and in their professional life, so it's important to understand what gives rise to them. In a new study, research reports that one common and well-intentioned way of attempting to convey girls' equality with boys actually backfires, saying that girls are just as good as boys at something leads to the listener to conclude that boys are naturally better and girls must work harder to be equal to them. So this, I think, is a great shame because men are both really, really smart. So I think what we can take away from today's episode is, for starters, don't say that. I know I definitely won't now because I didn't know that was harmful before. Chances are you aren't either. At least I hope so, otherwise I feel like a really bad person. Yes, but also it just shows that we need to combat these stereotypes, and it also shows that we need to make both boys and girls realise that they're as smart as each other, not just as smart. In fact, I'm going to stop talking because I think this just highlights how hard it is to actually change these stereotypes because they are so ingrained in our society. And even though we want to say girls are just as good, it's really hard not to say that because, of course, as we now know, that's a really harmful thing to say. So that's really, really interesting. Okay, so another one is psychological impact of a relationship ending is reflected in language of Reddit users going through breakups, not bake-ups. Okay. So, while some relationships are ended in the heat of the moment, for many the decision to break up with a partner involves several long agonising weeks of weighing up various options. During that time, your attitudes and behaviours towards your partner may change. You might become colder or more distant, for example. But what about your language? According to a new study, the language we use on social media just prior to breakup can often be a key insight into the emotional and cognitive impacts of relationship ending. Looking at over 1 million posts from 6,803 Reddit users who had posted r/breakup. I don't know, is that the Reddit version of tweeting? The team found changes in language were so consistent that they could even be found in posts completely unrelated to relationships at all. So I think it's actually quite interesting, and it also makes sense though, because we know that our language affects our behaviour and vice versa. So it's actually no surprising that when you're in psychological distress and you're really weighing up these options, that it would impact your language as well, and also your behaviour. Yes, I saw this one earlier. Right, so this one I really want to read. What makes for a meaningful death in fiction? In fiction, because because tons of people tend to die in my fiction. In fact, the book that I've just written is probably the most tamed of my books because hardly any of them die. So I was sort of itching to kill someone in a short story. Okay, so death can be a powerful narrative tool. We sub over the demise of a beloved character, cheer at the upcoming of our favourite villain, or sit at the edge of our seats, shocked at deaths we didn't see coming. Red Wedding, anyone? And no, I don't know what that is. Okay, so all deaths are not created equal. However, a new study looks at what makes certain fictional deaths so memorable. The team reports that although we find some deaths pleasurable, the long-awaited downfall of an antagonist, for example, it is those we find meaningful, whether that truly stick with us in the long term. And I completely agree, because it's not so much like psychology based, but basically it's all about the emotional resonance with the character that readers like and all of that sort of stuff. So that was that one was quite interesting. But I definitely know sort of pleasurable deaths. There can also be like a really annoying side to a character, because I think we've all like read books or seen films or TV programs where we just want one character to die because he's so annoying, or she. Okay, so another one is, we prefer to experience good and bad events on the same day as a friend. Okay, interesting. You will rub off the panels of a scratch card and you find you're the winner of £100. If you could choose when the same thing should happen to a good friend, would you rather be the same day as you win or a different day? And what if we're talking about negative rather than positive experiences? When would you both have been issued parking tickets, say, or both suffered a bereavement? Earlier work shows that we tend to prefer to get through a series of negative experiences as quickly as possible, and while we like to space out multiple personal positive experiences, God, that was a mouthful, so as to receive most pleasure from each joy. A new study finds that when we're thinking about shared experiences, though, this doesn't hold up. The participants in the study prefer to experience both negative and positive events on the same day as a friend, rather than be alone, as long as those events aren't powerfully emotional. The researchers think this is because of preference for integration, because it increases our feelings of a connection with others. This could have implications for how we arrange our lives during lockdown. And this I completely understand, though, because if you're having like something good, then you want someone else to feel good with you. But also, though, if nothing good happens on a particular day, but something good happens to your friend, then you are going to feel jealous and you're going to feel like, oh, why didn't I win £100 on the scratch card? But also, when we go through something negative, we want someone else to go through something negative with us, just so that we aren't alone and we have someone who knows what we're going through. And I would do one more, but my voice is really hurting at the moment. No, actually, this one's quite short, so I'm going to put my voice out for you all. Okay, so the last one is we're drawn to fictional villains who are similar to us. So, watching Return of the Jedi with my kids the other night, I found myself quite liking Darth Vader. After all, he's self-disciplined, determined, conscientious and uncompromising, while also being almost entirely evil. It's no secret that we can find fictional villains fascinating. It's been argued that that's because of our evolutionary drawn to understanding bad guys as well, of course, to seeing the good guys prevail. But research suggests that this isn't the full story, and this I completely agree with, though, because in writing, though, we also need to make sure that the fictional villain is also yes, there's also relatable, and also with that people can understand why they're doing what they're doing, because otherwise then your story just seems a bit out there and it can lose people. But I completely understand this. So that's enough for the psychology news section. Let's move on to the personal update. Moving on to the personal update. So I'm going to keep this very short because I've been doing projects, personality report, and lots of the less glamorous side of psychology. So there's not a lot to talk about in today's episode. Plus I've also been doing tons of fiction work, and I'm so glad to have another book done though. So I'm really pleased about that. But next week I'll be getting back to normal university work. So hopefully I'll have a few more interesting clips from lectures to share with you. And as always, I always love to know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. And fitting with the theme of today's episode, which is about anxiety, the sponsored product for today's episode is Abnormal Psychology, a guide to depression, anxiety and more, 3rd edition. So this book I've really enjoyed, and I'm actually going to tie it a lot into today's episode because the book really does go into anxiety, what causes it, and also the bad side, because anxiety is not one condition like I first thought when I first started out, because there's so many different types and all of them have their own difficulties and also like a treatment. So was really, really interesting, like researching it all, writing it all up, and as always, it's always in a fun, easy to understand way, so that if you're bored of really boring textbooks, it's going to be nothing like that. It's going to be fun and enjoyable. So, but that's Abnormal Psychology, a guide to depression and anxiety and more, 3rd edition, and it's available for a pre-order now. Available on all major ebook retailers like Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and many more. And you can pre-order the large print, paperback, and hardback version from Amazon or your local bookstore. And if you're listening to this in the future, so like after April, then you can get the ebook and the paperback for free at your local library if you request it. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to make anxiety your ally. Now, if you remember a long while back, I went through this massive phase of telling you that stress is actually quite beneficial, and there was this great TED talk on it, which if you go to connorwhiteley.net/books, scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's the great TED talk there that I highly, highly recommend, and it's such an amazing TED talk. So when I found today's article, I actually thought this was really interesting, because this actually takes the same sort of idea that anxiety doesn't have to be bad for us, and it's actually our body trying to help us. So this I thought was really interesting, and that's what I want to talk about today. So we know with the pandemic being chaotic and adding anxiety into our lives, our initial reaction is to suppress our feelings and avoid it entirely, because no one wants to be anxious, no one wants to feel concerned or anything like that. But this is actually quite wrong, because while this approach might be helpful in the short term, in the long term, this creates some more problems, and we also miss opportunities to deal with our fears. So why do we avoid anxiety? So this is a great one. This is something that I love, because again though, in our culture, in our society, we are told that anxiety is a disease. We are told that anxiety is a dangerous, life-threatening condition that must be avoided at all costs. And if you've got anxiety, then there's something wrong with you, you're not right, you're ill, and all of that very negative stuff. And I can understand this, because having anxiety can be disruptive to our lives, and it can cause psychological distress to our clients, to ourselves, to anyone. But this does not help people. In fact, this can make people feel worse and even more anxious when people do suffer from anxiety, because we're thinking, oh, I don't want people to know that I've got anxiety. I don't want people to judge me and to think that I'm a horrible mess. And the more you try and avoid anxiety, the more it grows. And it's also just like saying, don't worry. As we all know, that doesn't help. I cannot remember a time when someone said, oh yeah, well, don't worry about it, or don't worry, it will go perfectly. As we all know, that really does not help. So how do we make anxiety our friend? So interestingly, in 2013, researchers from the University of Hartford found that socially anxious people who were told to believe anxiety benefited them coped better during strategies and during the tasks, which I think is quite interesting, because this is all about a mindset shift. So we get to start believing that getting anxious is because our mind and body want us to benefit from this. They want us to know that our mind and body are ready to handle a threat. So, of course, your body wants to protect ourselves and the future, and this is what anxiety is all about. It always comes from our ability to think about the future, and then we get anxious because we care about the future, they don't want anything bad to happen to us, meaning that we get anxious to make sure that the future is okay, and so that we can start to take action to prevent any possible threat to our futures. So, how do we make anxiety our friend? So, I know this has been quite a short episode, but I just want to wrap up saying this. So, the best way to practice this new skill, so when you next get anxious or you know someone who does, remind yourself and this person that this is your body and mind wanting to help you deal with a threat. Do not avoid this. This is your body wanting to help you. So identify the threat and deal with it. And remember, you are in control. So I know this was quite a short episode, but I really hope that you enjoyed it. I really, really recommend that Psychology of Stress video at connorwhiteley.net/book. Yes, and then you scroll down to the bottom. It's a great one. Please check out Abnormal Psychology, A Guide to the Treatment and Causes of Anxiety, Depression and More, a 3rd edition. Really recommend it. And also, if you know someone else who would enjoy the podcast, then please tell them about it. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people spread the word. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.